Uh-oh. News.
Rolling. That's how she be looking in all her interviews. I'm gonna beat her. Girl, get out of here. Miss me with that. What? This the face right here. March 22nd. Coming for the belt. The belt is coming back to America with me. I'm gonna bust her nose. I'm gonna break her nose. I'm gonna have her bleeding around the canvas. So if the doctor don't throw in the towel, I'm sure Eddie Hearn will.
That is a very animated Tiara Brown ahead of her upcoming fight with Sky Nicholson in what is Tiara's very first world title fight, and I don't begrudge her enthusiasm. However, I'm not convinced of it either. That either the referee's gonna stop the fight or Eddie Hearn is gonna stop the fight. Listen, I would think that a fighter strong enough and sharp enough to stop Sky Nicholson would have been able to stop Gabriela Bouvier or Calista Salgado, more simple and stationary targets than Sky Nicholson. I am not a fan of Sky's methodology by any means, but it is effective. And she is tricky. I've heard it said on more than one occasion by one of the regulars on the panel that Sky Nicholson's base style doesn't really lend itself to the growth of women's boxing because a part of the boom that we've seen in the last 7 or 8 years is because the fights are so action-packed, where Sky is not an action fighter. She's more of a Shakur Stevenson than a Keyshawn Davis, than a Lomachenko. She's a finesse fighter. A pure boxer, and pure boxers are not everybody's cup of tea. But where I disagree, and where I think Sky could become at least one of the faces of the sport, is the personality. Personalities. Not just hers, but her opponents. Every girl that swears up and down on a stack of Bibles, she's gonna be the one to beat Sky, she's gonna be the one to catch her. Every time they do that, the more trash they talk, and the more times she wins, the more it adds to her profile, to her celebrity. I say it all the time. In the featherweight division, the most recognizable fighter is Amanda Serrano, but second to her is Sky Nicholson. Well, Amanda's off at 140, negotiating a trilogy with Katie Taylor that pretty much gives Sky the run of the place. I think she's gonna beat Tiara Brown. I think she's gonna outpoint her. I think that Tiara's gonna go in there looking to outmuscle Sky, and Sky's going to outhustle her. Tiara's the stronger puncher of the two. I give her the edge in power, but power counts for nothing if you can't land. And Tiara, at 36 years old, is far too slow. Not necessarily a big fight for Sky, but a decent-sized scalp. The trash talking helps. 18-0 to Sky Nicholson, who is 12-0. Tiara's been around a bit longer, had a few more fights, but her quality of competition isn't actually much better than Sky's. There's a legitimate argument. Sky's quality of competition is better than hers, even though Sky has less professional fights and less time in. Sky on points is the pick. Safety first, long and loose, on the outside and on the move. She wins a fight. Tiara won't be able to catch her. She won't be able to set her feet to deliver those power shots. She's going to spend that whole night chasing Sky and getting walked into counters. Over to this weekend's fight. On Friday, Keyshawn Davis will be making his maiden voyage, his bid to become a world champion by taking on the Ukraine's own unbeaten Denis Berinchyk, WBO lightweight champion. Just a refresher. Denis Berinchyk, who shut down 3-division champion Emmanuel Navarrete for what was the vacant WBO title and what was Emmanuel's bid to become a 4-division champion, Denis sent him packing. Sent him back down to 130. He's WBO champion now, and Keyshawn Davis has become his problem. Keyshawn Davis, 12-0, 25 years old, an orthodox fighter. To Denis Berinchyk, who's 36, also an orthodox fighter, well-schooled amateur, movements and footwork in keeping with what you expect from a Ukrainian boxer. Think Vasyl Lomachenko, Alexander Vozdik. Guys like that.
Cutting angles, pivots, combinations.
He's looking to hit you in the blind spots, this guy is, and he's a lot trickier than Gustavo Lemos, who Keyshawn last fought.
19-0 with 9 KOs.
Wouldn't be surprised at all if this Friday Keyshawn Davis looks a little bit more human than he did in his last outing. Think he's gonna have to work for this one. I heard Keyshawn Davis, not but a few weeks ago, entertain the possibility of moving up to 140 as high as 147. He's on the cusp of becoming a world champion at 135, but I don't expect him to go on an undisputed run.
Why not?
His old buddy, Shakur Stevenson, just so happens to be WBC champion here, and they've made it clear they will not fight each other under any circumstances.
Maybe one day they'll change their mind sometime down the line, but we're not there yet.
I think Keyshawn packs a big enough punch, enough power, that he can hurt Dennis Berinchyk. Maybe get him out of there, but catching him is going to be tricky.
He's no flat-footed plotter.
And he's not going to stand right in front of you like Gustavo Lemos did. Likes to cut angles, throw combinations. There's going to be some stuff coming at Keyshawn's way. Keyshawn, who was last in action in November of last year, he fought 3 times last year, whereas Dennis only fought once, the Emmanuel Navarrete fight back in May. And he's been on that schedule for 3 going on 4 years. He only fought once in 2022, only once in 2023, and only once last year. Hard to stay sharp and keep up the momentum on a schedule like that, in tandem with his age, that he is in his mid-30s.
Keyshawn is fast and sharp. I think ready to become a world champion. I like Keyshawn Davis on points. I don't rule out a knockout, but I'm going to go conservative on this one.
Dennis Berinchyk is a bit of an aggressive customer. He'll give Keyshawn Davis something to think about.
Something to respect.
But I like Keyshawn Davis on points this Friday to pry the brown belt away from Dennis Berinchyk.
Men's light heavyweight news. Boxing insider Rick Glaser has produced his own set of numbers for what was the David Benavidez versus David Morrell fight. And it's a far cry from the numbers we saw.
It's a far cry from the numbers we talked about in my previous video. Rick said, finally, here it is. You've seen a lot of phony pay-per-view buy numbers for Benavidez versus Morrell on social media, floated to the media by PBC operatives, and put out there by the usual suspects. In truth and reality, it did barely under 70,000 buys. Now you know.
How does one reconcile the disparity in the numbers that Rick Glaser is now reporting versus the numbers that Dan Rafael reported a few days ago?
There's a noticeable difference between just under 70,000 buys and an approximation of 160,000. It's more than double the number that Rick Glaser is now reporting. It doesn't have to be that Dan Rafael is lying or exaggerating himself,
So much as he's being lied to.
so much as his source may be the one that is exaggerating, fudging the number.
How can you be so sure which number is the right one?
The price point. At $80 in this economy, in these trying times, it's a little hard to imagine that 160,000 people bought that pay-per-view, and with pay-per-views being so easy to illegally stream now, piracy being at an all-time high, when so many people have that alternative, it's a little hard to believe that the pay-per-view did 160,000.
That's how.
In the neighborhood of 70,000 seems a lot more realistic, but for doing a paltry number like that, why even bill it as a pay-per-view?
Why do it?
The PBC really don't have a choice at this point, and they are operating out of necessity. It's the only way to put up the money to do the show with any hope of getting it back.
They need to.
Because they're not getting a rights fee from Amazon, they're not getting a budget, for argument's sake. Anything in the neighborhood of 70,000 to 160,000 pay-per-views sold is not enough to try and dictate terms to the winner of Better Beef versus Bivol. And that's the bottom line. That's why I rounded up. I entertained the high number to prove a point, though this number is a lot more realistic.
And that's not enough to tell the undisputed champion what to do and where to fight.
Many of the Benavidez fans don't like this discussion. I had one guy who goes by the name Atheist Ghostbuster say, Canelo's taking refuge in casual talking points like pay-per-view numbers to somehow suggest That justifies his blatant duck of David Benavidez.
They want to keep the conversation on Canelo.
The worst part is seeing so-called boxing aficionados engaging in this instead of talking about the quality of the fight.
Buddy, if the quality of the fight were that great, then the numbers would have been better. That's the point.
A new era of man fans masquerading as boxing fans is sad.
What's sad is how hard you guys try to keep the conversation on Canelo when the Canelo fight isn't happening. It's not happening in May. It's not happening in September. It's not happening for David at all.
What's actually sad is you rather spend all year harping about Canelo as if it's going to affect any change.
It's not.
There is an undisputed title fight right in front of David Benavidez, but you rather keep the conversation on Canelo, the focus on Canelo, when if he's as scared as all of you say, then David should move on.
That's all the more reason you should stop beating that dead horse.
Crying to me about it isn't going to make it happen. There's just not enough of you. Whether I go with Rick Glacier's number or Dan Rafael's number, it all says the same thing. There's just not enough of you. And the point and purpose of discussing the buy rate for David Benavidez's last pay-per-view is his assertion that a fight with the winner of Better Be versus Bivol has to happen in Vegas. Or did you forget?
That's the point.
I feel like it'd sell more here, to be honest with you. That's the one thing they talk about, like Turki Al-Rashid, and they tell you, would you ever fight with him? And I want to take advantage of this market because I've worked 11 years this is my first time having a freaking crowd like that, so I want to stay here.
Stay there and do what? 70,000? 160,000 if you're lucky?
That's why we're talking about the buy rate, you moron.
Is David generating so much money here in America that it would make more sense to face the winner of that fight here instead of over there on Turkey's dime?
The answer is no.
Well, you bellyache about the same thing, the same guy who's not fighting David at any point this year, and you know that. We all do.
I'm looking for alternatives. I'm looking for solutions because I'm a forward thinker, not a loser like you.
When faced with a problem, there are two kinds of people. People who just sit around complaining about the problem, and those who try to solve it.
Fix it.
In a situation where Canelo Alvarez isn't giving David the time of day, what are David's alternatives? What else can he do to be in a big fight? He can fight the winner of that one, you moron.
But he'd rather sit around wasting time, and so would you, talking about the same thing that isn't going to happen.
Wasting time. Because what these numbers tell us is you're not generating so much in America that it would make more sense to do that fight here than there.
An obvious deflection. Not on my part, on theirs. They want to keep the conversation on Canelo so they don't have to talk about Artur. So they don't have to talk about Dimitri.
An exercise in futility would its tantamount to a small child throwing a tantrum.
You don't really want a solution, and you don't want people like me having this conversation.
But you don't pay no bills around here, and you don't dictate to me what subject matter we discuss.
Or why.
It's either you're too stupid to partake in this conversation, or you're only playing stupid, playing dumb, to keep the focus on Canelo. But where has that gotten you? And where has that gotten David?
Nowhere.
I wonder if he's even going to fight again this year, because he only fought once the last one.
We know the PBC don't have any other prize stallions at 175.
One way or another, it seems that he needs to change his decorum.
Believe that Turki Al-Sheikh is taking a direct shot at PBC and Al Haymon by putting out the pay-per-views at $19.95 to $29.95, and I think he's taking a direct shot at him by the Canelo thing and bringing all the big fights over there. And I think that these are subtle attacks on they're really subtle attacks on PBC.
Along with producing his own set of numbers via his own sources for the PBC's latest pay-per-view, Rick says, I believe that Turki Al-Sheikh has done an excellent job of pushing the demise of PBC, intentional or not, but definitely moving PBC closer to ultimate ruination by drastically lowering pay-per-view prices, taking Canelo from PBC, etc. Boxing does not need Al Haymon and PBC. Thank you, Turki Al-Sheikh.
Is that what's going on? Because we know that Rick's not a fan of the PBC. We know he doesn't like Al Haymon.
Is this a gross misinterpretation of what's happening based on Rick's own personal preferences? And I don't think so. undercutting the competition on a long enough timeline can run them out of business. If you're selling your pay-per-views for 25 and the other guys are selling theirs for 80, they have to justify why theirs costs so much more than yours.
And if they can't?
Not everyone can afford to play this game, this battle of attrition, if you will. But given that Turkey's war chest is a lot more than what the PBC have to play with right now,
Could run them out.
when you go to Ring Magazine, which is now owned by Turki Al-Sheikh, and you see what promotional outfits they are involved with, they list anyone from Matchroom to Queensberry to Top Rank to Golden Boy to Boxer, but you don't see the PBC.
Their insignia.
So it's a roll with us or get rolled over kind of deal. You can't interpret Turkey poaching Canelo Alvarez from them as being good for the PBC. It was understood that his May event was going to be promoted by them.
That's what Jake Donovan said a few days ago.
So that if now you don't have Canelo Alvarez's fights to promote, to market, to sell, what do you have? And thus, it can be interpreted as an effort to run the other game in town out of business by doing business the way you're doing business.
I said it in my previous video, and I'll say it here again. Best case scenario, David Benavidez versus David Morrell generated approximately 160,000 buys.
Those are the same kind of numbers you were doing on Fox, and those are the same kind of numbers you were doing on Showtime, both of which ended up leaving the sport of boxing. So if history is any indicator of things to come, the same thing may happen on Amazon because you're doing the same thing.
Now, it's important to note that before Turkey's entry into the sport of boxing, the PBC were already heading in this direction. His entry now accelerates that.
Makes their job harder to do, the pay-per-views harder to market because there's somebody else putting better cards together that are cheaper.
While content creators here in America continue to play favorites, pretending that if they say something enough, it'll be true, the reality is Al Haymon is no competition for Turki Al-Sheikh. The PBC
are hanging on by a thread. How are they supposed to compete with both Riyadh season shows, Ring Magazine shows, Matchroom, Top Rank, Golden Boy, Queensberry, when they themselves only did 5 cards last year? How?
It's not a competition anymore.
I don't think it ever was, because Turkey's entry into the sport of boxing starts right around the time that Showtime abandons the PBC and they migrate over to Amazon.
It was always going to be this way. This was always going to be the outcome.
Now, unless some other broadcaster steps in and decides to invest in the PBC the same way that Showtime did for a number of years, unless that happens, and that's a Hail Mary scenario,
That's a hat trick.
I don't see how they can sustain with things being the way that they are. Former Showtime Sports president turned PBC consultant Stefan Espinoza started last year saying they're looking for a new broadcast partner.
As the Amazon deal was kicking off.
And that was last year. You wouldn't be looking for another broadcaster if you're getting what you need from Amazon, right?
Right.
So, a full year later, does it look like things got any better? It's Rick's interpretation that Turkey is trying to run them out of the sport. The way it looks, Turkey's got a vision, and you're either a part of it
Or you will be out of view.
out of the picture. They already didn't have the resources to keep up with their competitors. Turkey doesn't actually have to work too hard to run them out.